This is the usual awkward silence before seeing at least one or two names popping on the screen in every live. Let's see if someone is gonna join. I wonder if I am live in the first place. I think so, yes. Yes. I see that people are slowly joining. Right, so hi everyone and welcome back to yet another Pulse community session. My name is Diana and I am the community manager at Human Rights Pulse, as you might know by now already. But just quickly before introducing today's topic, I just wanted to say to our community members to please feel free to reach out to me anytime. So if you've got any question, any project that you'd like to explore, or anything really that you'd like to say, I know the temptation is very strong to just revert back to our beautiful executive director, Aksa, but please do message me instead, and we can just discuss about everything you want really. And actually I think some days ago, a week ago, one of our community members, Ploy Woods, came up with one of such mini projects, and this is precisely why we're here. This is why I am here, to facilitate this conversation and to allow you to showcase your project's idea, questions, whatever you might want to speak about. So yeah, that being said, I'm sure once again that today's topic is going to be very, very, very insightful for many of us, because we're going to speak about coffee and human rights. So I know that some people do not like coffee, do not drink coffee, but I'm quite sure and confident in saying that the vast majority of us is a moderate to heavy coffee drinker, myself included, of course. So it's going to be particularly insightful, as I said, to see how our daily coffee intake is actually impacting people's lives. And of course, when I say people's lives, I mean people's human rights and rights at large. So yeah, let me just invite our guest today, Ayesha Kuwari. Just one second. Yes, there we go. Hello, hi Ayesha.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you correctly. I can also see you very clearly. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good, very good. I feel so excited to listen to everything that you got to tell us today. So I guess yeah, if you want to introduce yourself first.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Ayesha. I'm a second-year law student at the University of Leeds, and I started Cafe Kuwari as a project to basically analyze historical events through the lens of coffee. So my slogan is a double shot of decolonization. So there's loads of events you can actually analyze through coffee, and it's been good. Yeah.
I'm just noting down a double shot of decolonization. That's such a strong and beautiful slogan. Beautiful. I was actually just reading through your blog. Did you set it up yourself entirely from
Yeah.
scratch?
Yeah.
That's
Like Wix platform, but yeah, I had fun with the graphic design.
that's really, really nice. I'm gonna ask you something because I've read some of your articles, and I've got some things that I'd like you to elaborate on. But I guess yeah. So the very first question that I'd like to ask you is, how you mentioned history. So how does history play in today's coffee trade? What do we see any sort of impact that history has on today's coffee trade?
Yeah, so a lot of the human rights issues that we can actually talk about, we can explain it through, first of all, the overproduction of coffee. So you need to really understand the historical roots to be able to go anywhere with this. So for example, there are over 100 varieties of coffee, but we only actually consume two types. So for example, if you drink instant coffee, you're drinking something called Robusta, and this comes from Vietnam, and there's currently overproduction of Robusta in Vietnam. And some of the human rights issues in Vietnam are that, for example, there's a region called Khe Sanh, and that's where you get a lot of coffee grown. And during the Vietnam War, the US heavily bombed that area. And that left a lot of unexploded bombs that still exist till today. So there's been cases where farmers and coffee pickers, they've lost limbs and even died while picking coffee because of an explosion. So whenever I see instant coffee, it just makes me think like, yeah, this survived that. You know, it could have gone the other way. That's Vietnam. So you still see like an imperial hangover from that time. So people my age are literally risking their lives for the coffee that ends up on our table. That's instant coffee. There's also the coffee that, for example, your Starbucks coffee, your any espresso-based drinks like lattes, cappuccinos. You make that through a bean called Arabica, and that is overproduced in Brazil. And this requires more of an explanation than the Vietnam one. So, for example, in Brazil, let's go slightly back. So, for example, what is now modern day Haiti used to be called the colony of Saint Dominique, or the island of Saint Dominique, and this was controlled by France. And it was a very wealthy colony because of the cheap African slave labor that it imported. And it was a cash cow for France because of the sugar and the coffee it produced. So there was a revolution, a revolt, and Haiti abolished slavery and gained independence. Okay, and a lot of coffee plantations were burned just because of, you know, the association that they had with slave labor. But other than that, because of this event, now this is really interesting. So because of this, Napoleon lost Haiti. So now Haiti has gained independence and it has a black ruler. Napoleon's really mad, and because now he's also acquired Louisiana, and he thinks that's useless. So he sells it to the US for something like $15 million. So when you think about it, the US wouldn't have had Louisiana as, you know, if it wasn't for this. So coffee really does play a huge role in like overall world events. So because of this, a lot of Western powers, such as the US, they broke commercial ties with Haiti, so they stopped trading with Haiti. You know, they were allies with Napoleon, and there was a fear of legitimizing Black rule. So they didn't want to legitimize Black rule, which is why they stopped trading. Now, because of this, they still wanted coffee. So instead of Haiti, eyes turned to Brazil as it had the ideal conditions for growing coffee. And there was already slavery in Brazil because even though slavery was abolished in the US, North American slave traders, they started like a triangular trade in Brazil. So there was already slavery there. But then it's really sad because the abolition of slavery in Haiti actually led to increased slavery in Brazil. And now the effects were felt long after. So Brazil was actually the last South American country to abolish slavery. And even after abolishing slavery, there was still, then there was a phase where there was poor white European immigrants who had forced labor. And that's why when you read the news, you often hear about slavery in Brazil, just modern day slavery in Brazil or child labor, just because you can still feel the effects of that. You know, the fact that it was the last Latin American country, South American, you can still feel the effects. And what doesn't help, you know, you would think that child labor is an uncontroversial subject. Like you would think that everyone agrees that it's wrong. But then you get the president of Brazil himself, President Bolsonaro, defending child labor because he doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. He's like, yeah, I worked when I was 9. It was harmless. And then he also thinks that slave labor is too broad in Brazilian law. So again, like that doesn't help the situation at all, you know? So yeah, those are the two, Vietnam and Brazil. Because of overproduction of coffee in Vietnam and Brazil, it's affecting world coffee prices. Because there's more supply than there is demand, the actual cost of coffee is like what you pay to farmers is really low. And fair trade isn't really helping that either. And we can get onto that later, but fair trade hasn't made much of an impact just because of how unstable the coffee market is as well. So yeah, that is to really understand the main issue is you need to understand that overproduction of coffee is not a good thing. And then how does that lead to modern day slavery? Well, yeah, you can, as I mentioned, there's a colonial hangover, but other than that, so there's something called Dispatches by BBC and Channel 4. They carried out an investigation where they went to coffee plantations in Guatemala, and they found child labor. So they found children as young as 12 or 13 working 6 days a week on the farm, on the coffee plantations. And when they spoke to some of the children, they looked around age 8. And, you know, for those of you that like, you can see how this is wrong, but, you know, the International Labor Organization, they've said that this breaches international law because children should be in school. You know, if someone is working 14 hours, if children are working 14 hours a week, when are they going to school, you know? So that is one issue. And big, like coffee corporations, they haven't been very helpful either, in the sense that they haven't denied, like not all of them have denied the claims, but some of them are just like, oh, but we can't guarantee that there's not going to be child labor in our, you know, so hasn't really helped situation either. So yeah, and St. Thomas Reuters has found child labor in Brazilian coffee plantations. So that's one of the reasons I mentioned. So there are all these issues coupled with the overproduction of coffee that actually lead to many farmers having to migrate. So there's this really interesting podcast series by something called Filter Stories, where it's like, are your coffee dollars funding Trump's wall? So it's basically looking at Trump's wall through the eyes of coffee. The media hasn't helped with this either, where they've painted immigrants as, you know, people who just, you know, we have to understand these immigrants aren't going to the US because they want to live in Hollywood or because, you know, they genuinely have no other option. And it's because of this, or many reasons. So the fair trade isn't helping, the overproduction of coffee. And this primarily comes from South America. And the issue is in some of these countries, children can acquire their parents' debt. So like if parents are unable to pay off debt, the children will acquire it. So it's like they're born into debt, you know. That is an issue. And another issue, actually, I don't want to go too into this because it goes into another topic, but climate change has really played a role. So there's this type of fungus called coffee leaf rust that grows on the leaves of coffee. It looks yellow, and what eventually happens is it just kills off the whole plant. So we have to, like, coffee, for those of you that don't know, coffee actually comes from a plant. So it's in a coffee cherry, and then when you take it out, depending on the type of bean, you get the type of plant, you get two types of coffee beans inside. So it's a plant, you know, it's gonna, just like other plants, it's influenced by climate change. So this fungus will completely destroy plantations. And we've seen this, it's not scientists, you know, this has literally happened before. Sri Lanka was known for its coffee plantations, and then the whole thing just wiped out. So what's happening now is you and me, we might not feel the effects of climate change that much already, but these farmers are already feeling it because they're noticing leaf rust coming. The frequency and the scale of it has just increased over the years. And because of that, especially in El Salvador, it's leading to migration to the US border. So, and also paying for chemicals that stop this fungus growing is also expensive for the farmers. And this is one reason why fair trade doesn't help, because fair trade requires a certain environmental standard for farmers to comply by, which in theory is good. But when you think about it, why do impoverished people need to be paying for, you know, to preserve the environment where corporations themselves don't do that? You know, I think the coffee drinker should be paying that extra money. And it's the fact that, so for example, you might not know now we have fair trade coffee, we have fair trade bananas, but the fair trade movement actually started from coffee. So the fair trade movement began because of coffee and the state of Mexican workers. And its initial intention may have been good, but we have to remember that fair trade operates in a capitalist system. And this might sound counterintuitive, but just the fact that so many big chains like Starbucks and, you know, all these other chains have embraced it so well, it just shows you there must be something wrong. You know, it makes you skeptical. Like, if it was really making a huge impact, they would hesitate. Clearly, it's not costing them much. They're not losing much. In fact, I think because they've increased the prices, in some cases, they've actually increased their profits as well. So that's an issue. And there's a phrase used in American politics it's politically charged. It's called latte liberals. I don't know if you've heard of it before. Latte liberals, yeah. And basically by it's from conservatives to liberals. But if you actually look at what it means, there is some element of truth to it. So the Urban Dictionary, I use the Urban Dictionary just because it's really I use the Urban Dictionary for this definition just because it's very accurate. So for example, people who sit around and drink overpriced diluted Starbucks coffee while lamenting the plight of the poor. And we've all done that. We have Starbucks in our hand, we're drinking it, and then we're talking about some like issue, and it's like, and with fair trade, you often, I think when you buy fair trade, you feel really good about yourself, like, oh, I've helped someone. But if you actually knew where that money was going, and a lot of it isn't even going to the farmers. There's been loads of studies, like barely even a pence sometimes goes to the farmer, depending on like, what's happening. So the current situation. So even though they have a premium, but again, that's one issue with fair trade. Another issue is the fact that when you pick up a coffee bag that says fair trade on it, and you look at the back of the packet, it'll say coffee from Guatemala and Brazil. Great. Which city? Like you don't know. Whereas if you go to an independent cafe and you look at the back, it will tell you the city, it will tell you the farm, it will tell you like specific names. And you might not think like, I don't really need this information. You might not need it. You might even forget it. But it's that like transparency and that traceability. If you're able to trace where you got your coffee from, it's likely that the farmer is being treated well, being paid well compared to others. So I think, and again, the fair trade, you have to remember, fair trade is also a type of certification that farmers themselves have to pay for. So it's likely that the coffee next to it, the farmer was paid more, but it just didn't have the certification of fair trade. But again, fair trade is a step. So it has helped farmers, for example, in Rwanda. I've read stories where after the Rwandan genocide, the two ethnic groups, so the Tutsis and the Hutus, they were quite, because of the history of that, the genocide, relations between those groups still didn't recover, but the coffee trade has brought them together because fair trade to an extent did offer them some sort of stability, especially in countries where their coffee can be smuggled away or like their money can be smuggled. It offers them some sort of stability. But again, Rwanda, so yeah, it has helped some farmers in Rwanda. South America, not so much. So the fact that loads of farmers are having to migrate, it hasn't actually helped that much. And so if you want to genuinely be a more like you want to drink coffee that's helping people, I think you should really look for traceability. And that's something I think consumers can also lobby to big like coffee corporations to do. And it's really sad because if you actually look at South America and US intervention in South America, US funds other countries. The only thing the US funds helps coffee trade in some other countries, like elements in some places in Rwanda. The only thing the US has actually funded in South America is military warfare or like, got dictatorships and stuff. So for example, El Salvador, while there are other countries that have, links to coffee, there is a very direct and clear link between the state of violence in El Salvador today and coffee. So El Salvador, I'm not saying it was the most peaceful country in the world, but El Salvador, if you look at the history, there was something that began to happen, which was the creation of the coffee oligarchy. And they were basically just a small group of families that wielded massive economic power. Really a few groups of families, and they're called the coffee oligarchy because they owned coffee plantations and employed cheap labor, and they introduced vagrancy laws making homelessness illegal. So a lot of native people were actually stripped off their land as well, all these laws, and then they were forced to work on the plantations. And this is around this, and a few decades later, the Marxist movement was really starting. So this had an impact in El Salvador, and there was a communist revolution. And the government responded to this brutally by killing thousands of peasants in an event that's known as La Matanza, which is the massacre in 1932. And one of the people that died in this was someone called Facundo Martí, if anyone's aware. And this years later, so now we're moving decades into the Cold War, and the US is a very anti-communist stand. The FMLN is named after Facundo Martí, and they're a group basically fighting the government. and the US is funding the right-wing government a lot. So look at it, there's it literally, the reason there's so much social disparity in El Salvador is because of coffee, the coffee oligarchs, and US funding military, the right-wing government, it didn't help. So even it's not just coffee farmers who are behind Trump's wall, it's also just people in general who have nothing to do with coffee. Their lives have been affected by the coffee trade in El Salvador. And you can look at other countries like Nicaragua, where the US government funded the Contras, which were, again, right-wing government, fighting against the Sandinistas. And this is really interesting. So actually, British and Irish volunteers were called brigades, and they actually flew over to Nicaragua late 1980s, and they helped the Nicaraguan people because there was a labor shortage because of the situation that was going on. And they helped people pick coffee cherries. So, and they didn't demand special treatment. Like, they lived the same way as them, they slept the same way as them. So it was, you really see, like, so that's what I mean when I say coffee has always been inherently political. There are so many things that we can talk about, but the fact that it's a commodity, it engages labor and all these other human rights aspects. So if you just look at it, it's just, by nature, it's inherently political. And that's why we can engage so many human rights issues into coffee.
Wow, Aisha, that was a massive history lesson, as well as actual well, not biology, this science of the plant, and that I'm amazed. I'm almost blown away by every single thing that you said, and I've got so many questions for you. So I don't even know where to start. Well, first of all, I think it's very clear that history played and plays a massive role in our understanding and the development of coffee trade as well. And I'm absolutely sure that nobody will think that our daily espresso would literally result in people losing limbs somewhere in Vietnam, or social dispersion and unrest, as you just pointed out. So that is incredibly important to point out and to be aware of. Even though, of course, many people would respond to this as in saying, well, I can't control everything that happens in the world, kilometers far removed from me, but it is vital to at least be aware of it. I guess the very first question that I'd like to ask you, do you think that there has ever been a point in time where we were close to some sort of sustainability of the coffee trade, or has it always been just this massively political tool that has just ravaged entire populations?
Yeah, so for example, when you think of the country Yemen, all you think of is the state, people living in famine. Yemen, so even though coffee was first, it's known to be first grown in Ethiopia, it was first traded in Yemen. And for 150 to 200 years, the port of Yemen was the sole port of coffee. That's literally where everyone got their coffee from. But you don't think of that now, because soon after colonial, you get loads of colonies that are now growing coffee, and there's exploitation of people. So yeah, from the very beginning, colonialism has played a really big role in this. So there's always been exploitation when it comes to the coffee industry. And when you said, like, has there ever been a period where we've reached some sort of sustainability? I guess it really depends, because the coffee market is very unstable. So that, for example, in the 80s, there have been moments where there's been really high overproduction of coffee again. And then in those cases, the governments, they've had to buy off coffee, or the US, or like loads of other things. And there's been initiatives such as the International Coffee Agreement, which did help. But again, the US withdraws, and like, it's not very sustainable either. It's kind of like, what happens in the UN general, member states. There's not really a framework that can implement these rules. So I think that's what it really does lack a framework. And also another issue is with it's not really an issue, but with the International Coffee Agreement, a lot of the producer countries, they can play a massive role, because, for example, Saudi Arabia has oil, it can wield that power. So similarly, countries that have loads of coffee, they can wield that power. And it just leads to conflicting, ideals. And for example, like I said, President Bolsonaro, he's the president of Brazil, and he defends child labor that's happening in his country. So it's like, if the country's own leader is do anything about it? You know, what can other, yeah, that's an issue as well.
Yeah, totally. I think this is a problem. This is a massive problem when you've got the highest public officials who actually endorse instead of denouncing whatever problem there might be. And we are dealing here with child labor, which is one of the most devastating problems there are. So absolutely. But I'll ask you about that just in a minute. To tie in with this discourse of sustainability and so on. So you mentioned the fair trade, and I totally agree that we live in this delusional bubble where we buy our Starbucks. I actually pride myself of never having bought a Starbucks in my whole life.
Oh,
I
really?
mean,
Wow.
really, I can guarantee you, I'm Italian, so I'm very attached to my espresso, like the tiny one. So I don't particularly like the Starbucks ones, and I'm very happy about it. But yeah, many people are just, going out and about with their Starbucks coffee, thinking and priding themselves of buying fair trade and so on. But can you expand a little bit more of this problem with fair trade being actually inserted into the capitalistic context, and this fact that it ends up being a false pretense, basically? How
Yeah.
does that work?
So when fair trade started, there was a slogan called "Trade, not aid," and I think we really need to think about that. When we're buying fair trade, we're not really giving charity. What we're doing is we're paying someone for their labor, you know, and that's the issue because in a lot like the capitalist structure, it doesn't view manual labor the same way as it does other labor. So even fair trade can say, "Oh, this is the premium that we should charge to farmers." But and this is fair, but is it fair? You know what I mean? Like they don't value that labor. Coffee production is really like there's a lot of manual labor involved. It's not simply breaking a plant off a tree and putting it like you're not making an apple pie. You know what I mean? There's a whole process to it. You need to, depending on the type of, there's like a wet process where you lay the coffee down, you need to dry it, then it goes to a roaster. So it's all these different things. And because it's a huge supply chain, that's another issue with fair trade. It's not direct trade. I think sometimes we associate fair trade with direct trade. It's not. So that's an issue. And as I mentioned, yeah, the lack of traceability, we don't really know what's, you know, um, so it is that thing. And it's also like, you know, we don't want to speak like strongly against fair trade because again, we come from a very privileged position where we can just sit here being like, oh, fair trade isn't working. But then there's people, like I said, in Rwanda who it has helped. So again, it's like, it's a step, but there definitely needs to be more transparency and traceability as well.
I totally agree, and this is in fact a problem that I think human rights at large pose. So the fact that there is always someone benefiting while someone else is having a detriment, and it seems practically impossible to reconcile everyone's interests. And I think not only human rights, of course, this is applicable to every facet of human life. And I break my mind at night thinking of how we can live in a world and in a society in 2020 where every single individual interest can be reconciled, as I said. But yeah, anyway, this is just me going off a tangent. So in terms of framework, now we've mentioned the fact that the International Coffee Agreement is not really working, or there are problems with that. Do you think that strengthening the regulatory framework, whatever that might be, so being it wiping the International Coffee Agreement, drafting a new one, this is, very exaggerated, but do you think that is the way, or are there other ways in which we can strengthen accountability or traceability?
Yeah, so there's certain things, for example, child labor, modern day slavery. We already have frameworks in place, for example, with the UN. Now, it's another story altogether if countries aren't gonna, respect those, but there are already frameworks in place for that. But then there are certain things that the law doesn't exactly for example, there's been a whole vegan movement, with having more vegan milk in coffee chains. And this has actually encouraged coffee chains to give it for free. Because I remember a few years ago, you had to pay like extra money. And in some cases, you still do. But there's many coffee shops now that will literally give you like whatever free, like whatever vegan milk you want. So it's one of those things where with fair trade, the law doesn't really say like, oh, you shouldn't pay this this person this much, because again, like that's the issue with capitalism. Like there is a sense of non-interference, you know, like as long as you're happy with this trade, like we're good. But it doesn't recognize the fact that these farmers, like for example, the farmers I mentioned in Vietnam, who are literally breaking limbs or dying, you know, someone might say, oh, why are they still picking coffee cherries in that area if they know that there are unexploded bombs, you know?
Oh, it's the only choice they have.
Yeah, they have literally nothing else to do. And fair, like the whole discourse takes advantage of that, because these brokers know that these farmers, they have no other choice. So it's either something or nothing, you know? And the law doesn't, you know what I mean? The law doesn't really do much about that. So it needs to be more of a consumer thing, that consumers need to push coffee chains to increase, like you need to be able to go into a Starbucks or another coffee shop and actually see which farm your coffee is coming from. Like it's not good enough to be like, this is from Brazil or this is from Guatemala. Like the massive land that could be, you know, you don't know where. So that needs to be something as well.
Yeah, it's just incredibly terrifying and difficult. And the thing that infuriates me the most is that sometimes, instead of finding ways to efficiently hold accountable the big corporations and the brokers, or the higher economic system that sustains this sort of exploitation, the not the blame, but the narrative is wrongly shifted onto the individuals. So I totally agree with you that we should indeed look very carefully for a traceability that has correct and specific information. But at the same time, I also think that what we see in the media, similarly to what to how coronavirus is handled, is that we as single individuals, even climate change that you mentioned before, that we can make, that the blame is on us, basically. And this leads me to the point of holding corporations accountable, and this whole exploitation discourse is more of a comment, is not really a question, but maybe you can add to that. I think that something that we're seeing right now, especially in the field of business and human rights, or sustainability at large, is the fact that, first of all, everyone puts the word sustainability as a buzzword everywhere, in the same way as you were just saying, you know, like free trade, wow, fantastic. Brazil and Guatemala, this says absolutely nothing about the state of affairs. And actually, you might even incidentally contribute to further the damage while you're thinking that you're reducing it. But not only that, with business and human rights and corporate social responsibility, which was what I was trying to refer to as in individual against the big corporations who actually wield that power, the human rights have become a commodity in themselves. So I've read a very interesting, it was a thesis actually. I can send it to you. I'm sure you would love to read it. I haven't read the whole thesis, but some excerpts of it. So Starbucks, it was a specifically Starbucks case study. And the fact that they, first of all, they pride themselves so highly of being part of the fair trade is already symptom of the fact that it might not be making that much of a difference. But by promoting human rights, this promotion is in itself a commodity, because it drives sales, because Starbucks is instantly associated with the good and promoting human rights. And this is just another tool, which is crazy, another tool to increase and maximize that profit we were talking about. So I think that if we really want to see a change, there must be lobbying that you mentioned before, lobbying from people like me and you and everyone, or I'm not too sure whether to say boycotting, but similarly to that. And just stop strengthening the framework structures and strengthening whatever accountability there is, so as to stop this idea that human rights and sustainability are just buzzwords because, you know, it's cool to have that. So yeah, I don't know if you agree with this, or
Like when you see human rights, it's like a fashionable cause, you know, that's where the issue is, because it doesn't address wider issues. Like for example, Starbucks will say, yeah, we're fair trade, but there's also certain issues that you don't hear about in the media, like women and property has, like, even in the UK, that's just been an issue. But like when you look on coffee plantations, that issue is further, I mean, it's made worse by the fact that there is no accountability on how women are treated on coffee plantations, or the fact that a woman may work the same as a man and she will not own that part of the plant. You know, there's been loads of issues in like African countries with women not having not having control over the land that they rightfully should have. So it's just these issues, you know, and you don't hear Starbucks talking about this or other corporations talking about these issues. And Nescafe has huge headquarters in Vietnam, but why are people having to, you know, blow off limbs and die when you get, you know, it's a massive, they're making massive profits, but that isn't really going into the country. And because it's a communist, again, like, people might, you know, we've been like bashing and people might say, oh, like, you know, it's
Oh, wait a second, just Aisha, because I can't seem to be able to hear you properly for a while now. Let me see. Aisha, I'm afraid I can't. Oh no. Got a bit of a problem there, but she's connecting again.
yeah, I think my camera was just shocked by it heard. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't realizing whether it was me not hearing you or anything. So do you mind just repeating the last two sentences that you were saying?
What was I talking about?
So now I got confused as well. We were talking about traceability, sustainability, and the fact that the human rights, the glamorization of being like, oh yeah, we're promoting human rights, where in fact this is not happening.
Yeah, it's definitely not addressing the wider issue, which is there's loads of issues. And just Trump's wall itself is great symbolism of this, you know. Migrants are often painted as like, yeah, like I mentioned, like people who just want to, you know, go to the US, get even in the UK claim benefits. But again, like I'm not going to use the UK as an example because South American, it's a lot of it's related to coffee and the border. So people going, it makes you, it humanizes migrants and immigrants, you know. The fact that a lot of these children will be born into debt, they have no other choice but to go to the US. A lot of these farmers aren't breaking even with the money they have. And as I mentioned, it's not just people who work in coffee, just migrants in general, their lives have been impacted by the coffee trade in their country. So yeah, it honestly just humanizes conflicts. And a lot of corporations aren't recognizing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wanted to say something else in with the humanization or dehumanization of immigrants. Something that is very bad is once again with the Starbucks case study that I picked on. We also have the fact that there is this narrative you were mentioning before, the fact that the fair trade is not seen as a trade but as a charity, as you know, like this wrong perception, which leads also to the evocative imagery of the poor farmers or the poor, like I know with the US you were saying the reverse, but the usual narrative is the poor farmers in the South or the poor migrants all over the world, which just strengthens the fact that they are the poor of the world and they are far detached from us, and I'm doing good with my Starbucks fair trade coffee, and that's it, and that's gonna be it forever, because what can we do about it? But there's actually lots, as you just shown us, lots that can be done. And in fact, I wanted to ask you, how do you think that your blog contributes to making an impact, or how do you deal with it when?
Yeah, so well, to be honest, when I started it, I didn't really have like a wider. I really love, like, I'm a law student, but I love history. I remember loving history at school. It was just something I did. So I just started writing a blog, and then it turned into 2 blogs and 3, and then like it just kind of, and then I just realized that when you know, when you look at issues this way, it raises awareness, so people actually understand the link. Like, it's really important people to understand the history. And one of the things my blog does is it makes it more accessible. Like, no one has the time to read like 500 pages of, like, you know, like El Salvador history, but like this kind of, it makes it more accessible to people to read. And I think you mentioned something about solutions as well. this is actually an interesting solution. Again, it's not like serious, but there was a Washington correspondent who worked in South America, mostly with coffee, and he wrote an article about the whole like migrants behind Trump's wall. And one of the solutions he proposed was for people to drink more cold brew. Now, this is a really short-term solution. Now, why cold brew? So if you're not familiar with brewing methods, cold brew, it uses up a lot of coffee, like compared to other types of drinks. It uses up a lot of coffee. So it's the idea of increasing, well, not again, it's a short-term solution, but I think what he was trying to say was like, how do you stabilize coffee prices? So if we all had like a cold brew revolution, it would, but again, that's a very short-term solution because it's not sustainable. It doesn't address the other issues, but it's just a very like, you know, just another way. But I think the main thing we need to do is actually lobby for more traceability. So yeah, being able to see the farms, and yeah, making sure that fair trade isn't seen as charity, because you're paying another person for their work, you know, like just as you would pay a lawyer or a doctor, like you're paying another person for their labor. It's the problem that capitalism doesn't recognize their labor as important as a doctor or a lawyer. So yeah, that's the issue.
It results in that unfair hierarchy that is not really a thing because nobody talks about it, but we know it exists because capitalism furthers it deliberately. But yeah, I really like the cold brew revolution, and it doesn't matter that it seems to be like a short term or small thing. You know, you have to start from somewhere. So by all means. And actually, do you have any specific independent coffee brands that you would like to suggest to us?
Well, the thing about independent coffee, well, they're not really brands because it's like usually owned by a family or something. So it really, I think it depends on where you live. So there are some coffee, I live in Leeds, so there are some coffee chains particular to Leeds, but then it really depends on which city you live in. Like it's not going to be like a brand that you recognize. So I would literally just walk around, find your nearest cafe, or literally just search up independent cafes in the city that you live, and then you can go speak to the barista. And if you see their, like, not menu, but their catalog, you'll actually see the names of the farms, and you can buy it from them because they tend to have closer relationships with the farmers compared to, you know, so yeah, it's likely that the farmer is being paid better. So that is something you can do. And honestly, it tastes really good as well. Like independent coffee shops can have like even really good desserts, and just you'll notice their coffee also tastes really good. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it.
That's great. Like now, I said before that I pride myself not having ever bought a Starbucks, but I might well be complicit in buying some other sort of brands that are actually not fair in the genuine sense. So I will totally go. I live in Glasgow, so I will go on my walk on the lookout for some of these independent families or shops. Now I will conclude with this, with a final remark that might give us a little bit of hope. You just mentioned, I think in the middle of the talk, international law, which is very important. I kept on thinking about it because it's very easy to have these chats and to talk about sustainability and all that, and then forgetting about the sanctions that there exist, or, you know, international law that might sound like a big thing to people. And there are very nice developments in the field of international law, because now, and there is a specific ruling, a Canadian ruling, the Nevsun, I don't know how to pronounce it, ruling, which was, I don't remember if it was about coffee or chocolate, but or cotton even, but about plantations and child or just labor exploitation. And now we have a rule, okay, it's in Canada, so it hasn't become international law practice widely, but we do have a rule whereby big corporations who are at fault breaching their corporate social responsibility and who commit indirectly human rights breaches in the via the mother company in, say, I don't know, Brazil or or Africa or whatever, they can be liable under international law. Under domestic law, via a trick that international law has made. So it's a step towards increased accountability that I was very happy to learn. Now I know that in the US there is a law that is trying to counter that, so to literally revert back this rule at common law. So you know the way is very hard and stumbling rocks all over. But I'm sure that even like, you know, strictly legally speaking, there will be improvement. So yeah, Ayesha, thanks so much for a magnificent talk, a history lesson, a sustainability lesson, a coffee, like a pure coffee lesson and everything. And of course, lovely to see you, to chat with you. And you know, as always, I always say we always post these talks, so you will have all the time to just log in onto our Instagram page or YouTube page and see the chat again, or contact Ayesha. Please go. Her blog is cafekuwari.com. So I said before that I would have asked you about some of your articles, but I guess I'll just message you and I will ask you about those.
Honestly, thank you so much for inviting me. It was fun.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, and have a lovely, lovely evening. You and everyone else.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.